Hello, everyone. I'm Charlie Duke. I've been asked to give this talk to you over the miracle of electronics and Zoom. It was recorded in New Braunfels, Texas, where I live. And I'm pleased to be here in virtual anyway, with each of you to have an opportunity to honor God in this National Day of Prayer. So I want to thank the committee who asked me to come to be with you and to have this opportunity to share some thoughts to you. Hope you'll find it inspirational. I've spoken at many of these type events in the past, all over the United States, and I found them very uplifting for me. And my part, hopefully, was help to focus people's minds and thoughts on the value of prayer. And so I want to tell my story, but before I get into that, I just want to say on this National Day of Prayer, I don't know whether you had a Pledge of Allegiance in your service or not, but a lot of times I go to events like this and we have the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, in that pledge, you'll know there's one nation under God. And so I was thinking about that the other day. If the nation is under God, then our president's under God. Our Congress is under God. Our military is under God. Our states are under God. Our schools are under God. And you and I are under God. And the question I propose to you, and a question that had been asked to me 40, 50 years ago, are you really under God, Charlie? Do you seek God's direction? Do you pray? Do you pray for your family? Do you look to God to help you in your daily life? Nobody asked me those questions, but had they asked me those questions, my honest answer would have had to been no. I did not have God at the center of my life. I was successful. I had been in the Naval Academy and graduated from there in 1957. I fell in love with airplanes when I got to the Naval Academy, and so I wanted to go fly airplanes. Well, back then you could go to the Air Force from the Naval Academy, since there was no Air Force Academy in 1957, at least not one that had graduated a class. And so I was debating Air Force or Navy, but the flight surgeon that gave me my physical solved that problem for me. At the end of my physical, he says, Midshipman Duke, we found stigmatism in your right eye, and you don't qualify for naval aviation, but the Air Force will take you. So off I went to the Air Force in the summer of 1957, was in flight school when Sputnik went up in October of 1957. To me, the beginning of the space age. After that, I was in Germany, went to Germany and was a fighter interceptor pilot in the May of 1959. And during that year, the NASA was formed, the first astronauts were formed, and so the space age was upon us. I felt I was too inexperienced and didn't have opportunity to do that because I was just a young lieutenant. Well, but I had a great job. I was flying in Germany in some very exciting times. The Berlin Wall was built in 1961, and so there was a lot going on. And two of the things that I remember specifically outside the Berlin Wall was Yuri Gagarin, the first human being, went into space, a Russian cosmonaut. And that was in April of 1961. A few weeks later, in May of 1961, Alan Shepard went up and was the first American. So it was a thrilling moment for all of us that were alive at those days. Well, I had let's see the time frame. 2 weeks later after that, 3 weeks later perhaps, President Kennedy announced the Apollo program that we were going to go to the moon, we're going to land on the moon before the end of 1969. That gave NASA 8.5 years to accomplish this great feat. I laughed at him. All the pilots in my squadron, hoo-ha, yeah, sure. Rocketry back in those days were 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blow up rather than lift off. So we didn't think he had much chance. But the most amazing thing about it is I look back 8 years and 2 months after he made that statement, I'm sitting in mission control talking to Neil Armstrong when he landed on the moon. An amazing feat after just 8 years and 2 months that we had to get ready. Well, I went back to MIT in the summer of 1962 to get a master's degree. The Air Force sent me to MIT for this. While I was there, I worked on the Apollo guidance and navigation system, met many of the astronauts who were involved in the Apollo program, and I'd never met anybody so excited and so enthusiastic about their career and their job as these men. So I asked them, how do I get that job? And they came back and said, well, you need to get your degree here at MIT and then go to test pilot school, get out of test pilot school, and you might have a chance. So I took their advice and volunteered for test pilot school, was accepted in the summer of 1964, went on from there to the next year. My wife and I settled in Edwards Air Force Base in California as I was a student at test pilot school. My boss was a very famous American test pilot, General Chuck Yeager, who flew faster than the speed of sound, the very first person to do that. And so it was an exciting year. I graduated in July of 1965, and in September I saw an article in the front page of the Los Angeles Times says, NASA's picking more astronauts, please apply. And so I applied, and in April of 1966 was selected, and to my surprise, I was picked, and so we moved to Houston to start my career as an astronaut in April of 1966. It was an exciting job. We were in the middle of the end of Gemini and the beginning of Apollo. We had some real disastrous things happen back in those days. We had 8 astronauts killed over a period of a couple of years, 4 in airplane accidents, 3 in the spacecraft that caught fire, Apollo 1, and 1 automobile accident. Some of the senior guys were retiring, like John Glenn, and others were grounded medically. Anyway, we got our group, who were the real junior ones, began to be picked for flight crew assignments. And I began to work on Apollo 10. And all of Apollo, we had 9 missions to the moon, and I got to work on 5 of those. 2 times as a backup crew, 1 time as 2 times as a Capcom in mission control, and then, of course, flew on Apollo 16. It was an exciting job. A very demanding job. We worked long hours. Astronauting is not an easy job. You just don't show up at 8 o'clock in the morning and go home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You always on the go, always going somewhere, always training. And so it was a, a, it wasn't, it was, I was really appreciating this job and what I was doing, but the long hours were hard and tough on our families. So I flew to the moon on the 15th, no, 16th of April, 1972. We launched. We were to be the fifth landing on the moon if all went well. We rode to the moon in a big rocket called a Saturn V, 363 feet tall, 33 feet in diameter, and weighed 6.5 million pounds as it sat on the launch pad. We were strapped in on the top of this thing in the command module. The windows were covered over so you couldn't see out at that point. We strapped in very tightly and we got ready to lift off. What we were all wanting to is let's go, I'm ready to launch. And sure enough, right on the second of our liftoff, right after noon on Sunday, 1972, April 16th, the engines ignited and we started to moving. And the ride on that first stage was very shaky, 363 feet tall, limber, aluminum structure, the engine's moving at the bottom and you're shaking like crazy up at the top. I found out later that my heartbeat was 144 when we lifted off from the Kennedy Space Center, pad 39A. John Young, the commander of our flight, was on the left side. I found out later from him that his heartbeat was only 70. So you can see who the cool one and the calm one was on this flight. We burned up 4.5 million pounds of fuel in the first 2 minutes and 41 seconds on that rocket. We entered orbit, we circled Earth over 1.5 times, and over Australia we accelerated to 25,000 miles an hour and we were on our way to the moon. I look back as we separated from the rocket, the spacecraft turned around, the windows are now uncovered, and I looked out my window and into my window 16,000 miles away floated the whole circle of the Earth. And we could see the Arctic Circle down across Canada, the US, Mexico, Central America. We could see the Pacific coast. You could see the southwestern United States. You could see the Rocky Mountains, but you couldn't see any evidence of civilization. There were three main colors, I remember: the white of the snow and the clouds, the blue of the oceans, and the brown of the land, and there was this jewel of Earth just suspended in the blackness of space. It was breathtakingly beautiful. We had a 3-day trip to the moon, and then we orbited the moon for a day, and after some resolution of some real problems that caused a 6-hour delay, John and I landed the lunar module on the rough Cayley Plains of the Descartes Highlands. If Neil Armstrong had landed at sea level, like we call sea level here on Earth, we would have landed 8,000 feet up in the Guadalupe Mountains or up in the Rocky Mountains. So we were a big elevation difference. We were to explore this lunar highlands, if you will, collect rocks, do experiments, and all of these things. And it was exciting. When we landed on the moon, we just exploded with joy and enthusiasm and excitement, and we were ready to go. Unfortunately, to being late landing, they changed the flight plan, and we had a 6-hour rest period before the first moonwalk. You can imagine how hard it was to get to sleep 4 hours after you landed on the moon. Well, the next day we got suited up, we got outside, and I was just awestruck with the beauty of the moon. Buzz Aldrin's called it magnificent desolation, and that's what it is, but it had a beauty about it. It was rolling rough terrain with mountains to our left and mountains to our right, and it's covered with dust, very, very fine, mostly gray in color. And everywhere you walked, you left a footprint. Since there's no atmosphere on the moon, you could look out all the way to the horizon, and it was a very sharp break between the bright lunar surface and the blackness of space. Since the sun's shining all the time, we were on the moon for 72 hours, and the sun always was shining. A day on the moon from sunrise to sunset is 2 weeks. So it was always morning on the moon day. And we could look out and see these long shadows, and we could look up and we could see the blackness of space, but no stars. From where we stood, the Earth was right overhead, and when you look up in an Apollo suit, you're looking at the top of your helmet rather than out into space. Well, we never got tired of the beauty. We collected a lot of rocks. We did all of our experiments. Then it was time to come home. We parked our car up on the moon. We had this little lunar rover that we drove around and to spot, and left the television camera on so they watched us lift off as we left the moon, and rendezvoused with Ken Mattingly and the command module about an hour later. The next day we left for Earth, and it's a 3-day trip home. We splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean about 2,500 miles south of Hawaii, and we were home safely. A very, very successful mission. I wanted to go again, but I didn't get another chance to go again. Well, Apollo was over about, and let's see, we got back in April, so Apollo was over in December of that year. And in 1973, early 1973, I went work on the space shuttle, which was our next program. But it wasn't the same. You know, I was 36 years old, and I'd climbed the ladder of success, and I was at the top of my career. And now I'm 37 years old, and the thought occurred to me, what are you going to do now? How are you going to top a walk on the moon? And that's a good question. So I had no peace in my life. I was always searching for the next adventure, the next thing to go. Unfortunately, all of the hard training and stuff, as I mentioned earlier, was hard on our marriages. A lot of divorces. My wife and I were almost on the verge of divorce. We were churchgoers. I'd been baptized when I was 11 years old, continued in the church. My wife was a cradle Episcopalian, and we enjoyed church, but church was church. It gave us no peace, no satisfaction, and no enduring desire to get close to God. And so we were just floundering around, and in 1975, I finally left NASA, decided to go into business to make a lot of money. So I put my eyes from the moon to money, and money's going to give me peace inside, I thought. Well, my wife by this time was on the verge of suicide and had no hope, had tried a career, this and that and the other, and so she thought about killing herself if life was so hard, so tough. But some people came to our church, a little church in La Porte, Texas, Episcopal church, and they shared their faith, how Jesus had changed their life. And she listened to them, and all of a sudden she realized after that weekend, I've tried everything but Jesus. And so that night, Sunday night after that weekend, she went in our bedroom, unbeknownst to me, and just knelt down and prayed, God, if you're real, Jesus, if you're the Son of God, I give you my life. If you're not, I'm ready to die. Well, God answered that prayer, and he revealed himself as the true and the living God. And over the next 2 months, after prayer after prayer after prayer was answered, simple little prayers that my wife was praying, Jesus revealed himself, and I watched her change from sadness to joy. A couple of months after that, we moved to the San Antonio area, and I opened a beer distributorship. I was going to get rich selling beer, and it was very successful. But after 2 years, I wasn't satisfied. There was no peace in my life, and so I'll try another career. So I sold the beer business. That was in March of '78. During those 2 years that we were in that business, my wife supported me. I was working really hard, responsible for 42 people and their livelihoods in this beer business. And so it was a tough life for us, but she just loved me. I'd never had such a understanding wife. I didn't think it was possible. How she, with all the things that never changed in me, she changed completely, and God gave her a love for me, and she was very faithful at that. So the next month, and let's see, that was April of '78. The next month, a friend of mine from church invited me to a Bible study with the family, well, my wife. So we went as a couple to walk through the Bible. It was at the tennis, not tennis club, but it's a camp on the edge of New Braunfels where we lived. And I sat there all weekend listening to the story of Jesus from Genesis to Revelations, how God had from the very beginning, from the fall of Adam, had a plan, even before that, had a plan to redeem us, to bring us back into fellowship with Him. And so as we get over to the New Testament and the stories about Jesus, I realized these are some of the scriptures I'd heard as a little boy in First Baptist Church in Lancaster, South Carolina, growing up. The one we all could quote, John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son. If you believe in Him, you'll not perish but have everlasting life." The thought occurred to me, that's either true or the biggest lie ever perpetrated against humanity. And guess what? I get to decide, and so do you. Is it true or is it a lie? You decide. If it's true, Jesus comes in and you believe it and say, "Jesus, come into my life," then God takes you into His family as a child of God. But you can reject it. You can walk away if you want to. Don't believe it. There are many other scriptures. Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to God except through me." Do you believe that, or is it a lie? It's one or the other. There's no in between. He was very positive. It's either true or it isn't. So I believed these scriptures and many, many more. And after that weekend, I went in my automobile, and I looked up over at my wife, and I said, "Dottie, I have no doubt in my heart that Jesus Christ is the Son of God." I said, "Lord, come into my life." And when I said that, I experienced the peace of God for the very first time in my life. I'd sold my business, made a lot of money, and so I began to read the Bible. And that's what I did for the next couple of months, just read the Bible. And the more I read of the Bible, the more convinced I believed it's to be literally true. And so it began to, and to me, the Bible is like an airplane flight handbook. You study, it's God's handbook for life. And if we put our trust in Him and start doing the things that He suggests to live a full life, then we experience a full life. Or we can just do our own thing. So I began to try to be obedient to God. And God began to speak to my heart about several things in my life that He thought was not right. One is the way I treated my wife. And so husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave Himself for us. That's 100% sacrificial love. And husbands, we're to love our wives like that. That's our example. So I began to try to do that. And as I went to Dottie and said, "Forgive me, darling, for all of the hurts and all the problems," she forgave me. And we started working on our marriage with Jesus at the center of our marriage. And now, many, many years later, we've celebrating this June 59 years of marriage. And I believe God's got a solid marriage with us. Then He spoke to me about my kids. I was very hard military drill instructor dad. I loved my boys, but I was going to make them perfect like I was. Well, I realized once I became a believer, I wasn't perfect. And so I went to them and in tears apologized. I said, boys, forgive me for the way I treated you. I'm going to try to be a godly dad now. And the youngest one looked up and said, that's okay, Dad. And I began to bless them, broke all the curses that I'd put on them. We have the power of life and death in our tongue, and you can speak life or you can speak death with what comes out of your mouth. And I'd spoken death into my son, cursed him in many ways. And I broke those curses and I said, God, help me to speak life into these kids. And they began to blossom like little kids. And a year later, they both became believers. And so as a family, we started walking together. We saw many, many answers to prayer. I can say that God is real and that He changed our family, changed our marriage, changed me, and gave me a generous heart and a desire to love one another. And I've seen Him answer so many prayers in our lives as a family. I mean, some big prayers about healing of allergies that my son Charles had. My youngest son Tom had some bad allergies also. God healed those. And then just an aside, two prayers that I want to tell you about. One was my sons when they were in high school. They drive my pickup truck to school, and there was a spare tire in the back of this pickup truck. Well, one day they came home and said, Dad, somebody stole the tire out of the back of the truck. So at first I was a little upset, but then I said, well, let's pray. So we prayed, and the prayer was, Lord, you know who took that truck. It's nobody's, that tire. It's nobody's, it's not a secret to you. So Lord, we ask you to convict that person to send that tire, to bring that tire back. But Lord, if it's a poor person who needs that tire, Lord, we give him the tire. That was my prayer. Well, a year later, we're coming back from a trip, and I'd forgotten about that prayer, actually. And so as we pulled in our driveway, I looked over, and there's our spare tire sitting in the side of our driveway. I don't know who it was. I don't know. It took God a year to convict that guy to bring back the tire. So that's an answer to prayer. Simple little prayers like that. We can pray for our nation. We need to pray for our nation. We need to pray for godly government. We need to pray for godly schools. We need to pray and pray and pray. It's so important. There's a story about this guy, a pilot in an F-14, no, I'm sorry, F-4, that was out of control. He got shot down by a missile, and he tries to eject, but he couldn't, the canopy won't go off, so the seat won't work. And so he's out of control, moments from dying, and all of a sudden he has this thought that his mother told him, said, remember this, son, whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And so he said, I became an instant whosoever. And I said, Lord, help me to get out of here. And instantly he was out of the airplane. So God answers prayer instantly. God answers prayer over a period of time. But he answers prayer. He's hearing us and listening to us. So this day of prayer, where we all need to know him and to seek him and to pray for our nation, he will respond. If you're here today and you don't know Jesus, then I suggest that you open your heart to him. He's given us a gift. My walk on the moon was 3 days, and it was a terrific experience. But my walk with Jesus lasts forever, and it's free. He paid the price. He paid the price for me. He paid the price for you. And so all you have to do is say, open your heart and say, Lord, I want to walk with you. If you do that, he'll come in your life. You'll experience the peace of God, and it will change your life and your family. So God bless you all. Thank you for having me here. Even if it's virtual, I can't see you, but I know you can see me, and I love you. God loves you. God bless America. Thank you very much.